Chapter 461. However, this was not Bouvard's voice. Bouvard's voice is congested, as if clogged with oil clumps, and it didn't match his nervous tone. And it was a woman's voice, with a touch of innocence but tinged with anger. It wasn't Margiela's voice either. So, who could it be? Someone else from Kinselo? Or maybe Amila? Jean had his doubts, but at that moment, a huge, dense sphere formed, from which Bouvard's figure emerged with an open mouth. Members of the powerful factions, who were not even affected by mental attacks, didn't get scared but deployed their protective shields as Bouvard's figure suddenly manifested. They were the elite, impervious to various forms of mental attacks, so they remained calm even when facing something new. Bang! Bouvard's breath expanded rapidly, creating a powerful and deafening sound, as if it could explode at any moment. It was evident that a massive force was about to be unleashed. Just before the breath burst, the protective shields of the elites shone intensely. The first place where the breath hit was where the run candles were stationed. Ha! The man at the front of the run candle formation shouted and released a powerful aura. The man screamed as if he had split the breath in half with his shout. It was because the breath was cut in half even before the sound resonated. But in reality, the man's sword struck the breath. Interestingly, he was armed with a sword and a shield, unlike the usual run candles, and exuded tremendous energy with each shout. Run Candle sent the older brother Vigo. Vigo Run Candle, Siren's fourth son and the sixth flag-bearer of the family. Behind him were the Run Candle Guardian Knights and 2 Execution Knights who deployed their protective shields. Jean thought Joshua would have come in person. Is he busy with something else? Amila was one of the few remaining significant neutral forces, so Jean had anticipated that the major factions would send their standout members. In other words, they would send someone from the major flag-bearers. Vigo wasn't lacking, but this situation required sending an opponent worthy of Run Candle's top flag-bearer. However, when Jean looked towards the Zippel faction, he realized they hadn't sent their flag-bearers either. Midder Elner? Jean identified him first. The breath attacking Run Candle suddenly shifted towards Zippel, obscuring others, but there seemed to be no one of higher rank. Midder was Keliark Zippel's illegitimate son and had come to rescue Myron Zippel during the Cologne genocide. He has to pay some debts. At that time, Jean had almost lost his life because of the power of Keliark, space explosion, unleashed by Midder. The memory of that day flashed in Jin's mind, and he instinctively clenched his teeth. He had gone through quite a bit of trouble back then, but in the end, Midder had unintentionally been the one to help Jean. Thanks to Midder, Jean had learned that Keliark could split space. Jean also surveyed Kinselo and the Imperial family personnel. Apart from the gigantic figure of Bouvard, there were no familiar faces from Kinselo that Jean recognized. The Imperial family troops concealed their faces, but they seemed to be formed only by a special group and the Imperial Guard. Hyran had been unable to participate recently due to terrorism and political pressure. At the very least, leaders of the major families of the Empire or individuals of equivalent status should have attended. However, only regular members had come. Of course, the individuals from each faction currently on the Gaifa Islands were undoubtedly figures who could influence any part of the world. However, there was a clear sense that representatives were missing in this meeting of the 4 major factions where they were supposed to properly confront each other. Hey kid, didn't you tell me you'd use me as a halo? Murakan spoke. Now, Bouvard's breath was heading towards the Imperial family troops after striking Kinselo, and Murakan even laughed as he saw it. What kind of thing is that? I've never seen anyone release their breath like that. And it weakens with each collision, which is even funnier. Anyway, I don't think you need to use me as a halo in front of these guys. It's a shame, but honestly, you're better than those people, aren't you? It's an insult to compare them to our Lord. At first, you looked like a snake, but you're also quite skilled at flattery. Thank you, Murakanim, but in my opinion, I have a feeling that the people who should have come here originally are gathered elsewhere. Jean nodded at Lotta's words. He thought the same. There is a much more important figure somewhere else than Amila here. Otherwise, it was impossible that only people like Vigo were gathered here. Jean couldn't think of any other figure he should conquer besides Amala. Jean felt like he had been hit hard on the back of his head. So the guys who should be here are gathered somewhere else. There is something more important than Amala. Right now, I can't even guess what or who it is. So you're saying we've wasted our chance by coming here to the Gaifa Islands, right? Without even starting anything. Meanwhile, the giant Bouvard was regaining his breath once again. You can't be sure of that. Why? So we need to clear out here as quickly as possible because only lower-level members are gathering here, and then go to where they are. By then, they might have secured something more important than Amala. That's a matter of luck. But haven't we had enough luck lately? The giant Bouvard moved very slowly even when he shot the first breath and while preparing the new one. However, despite that, the various factions struggled to respond quickly to Bouvard's actions. They couldn't counter properly. Warriors shot their sword energy from where they stood, and mages cast long-range attack spells. But most of them had little power compared to the level of Bouvard's figure. Most of them were unable to unleash their full potential due to some kind of obstacle. Extraordinary individuals like Vigo and the Execution Knights protected those who couldn't fight. Moreover, they hadn't even acknowledged the presence of Murakan and his group. Floating in the sky, the dense energy, breath, and protective shields clashed, and dust clouds billowed wildly. And skilled individuals had no time to rest because they were constantly safeguarding their people. My lord, except for a few, everyone seems to be moving as if they've been poisoned or driven to madness. Undoubtedly due to the proliferating black energy. Like the ones we saw before on the island, it completely drives anyone below 7 stars insane. Lotta and Faye explained. Lot Nim. Isn't it some kind of poison or hallucinogen? That's right, my lord. Initially, I assumed it wasn't drugs due to the lack of a persistent smell, but the color and scale of the phenomenon indicate that if it were poison, there would definitely be a distinct smell. There are few toxins that produce this color. Murakan had lowered his flying altitude to avoid exposing himself to other factions, so he thought it was better to minimize his presence and remain hidden from other factions. However, as they approached the expanding muddy mist centered around the giant Bouvard, something changed in the Proc brothers. Kook! My lord! Lotta and Faye suddenly grabbed their heads. They also released the scales from Murakan's back, groaning in pain as if something was torturing them. They had released protective shields as a precaution when approaching the muddy mist, but it seemed to be of no use. Lotta Nim! Faye! Jean grabbed the two who were about to fall. Only a few seconds had passed since they approached the muddy mist, but the Proc brothers had turned pale and were sweating as if it were raining. Wake up! What's going on with you two all of a sudden? Murakan, we need to get away from the energy. Ha! Swish! Slash! Something sharp grazed the collar of Jin's coat. He reacted quickly and dodged the blow, which only scratched the front of his neck, but sharp claws were aimed at his throat. It was Faye's claw. Jin's dilated pupils reflected the gradual change in Faye's skin color. Her skin had changed, and now it had an astonishing resemblance to the tone of the giant Bouvard. And then, Faye tilted her head with all her might. It wasn't her intention. It was her last act to convey a message. After that, Faye completely lost her sanity. Wah! Faye attacked again, and Jean threw a punch with all his strength to knock her unconscious. Jean felt his fist land on her jaw, but Faye kept attacking as if she hadn't been harmed at all. Next to them, Lotta was bent over and trembling. He was unable to grab onto Murakan's back scales. He kept struggling against the muddy mist. Unlike Faye, Lotta's resistance was greater due to his greater achievements as a warrior, but he seemed extremely precarious, as it was unclear when he would give in. Ugh! My lord! Lotta Nim! There's something in my head. At that moment, Murakan ascended and escaped from the muddy mist. Well, what the hell? Kid, do you think they've finally regained common sense? The expressions and skin color of Lotta and Faye returned to normal at the same time, but the brothers still panted and seemed deeply shaken. What is this murky mist? What is its nature? Why does it only affect Lotta and Faye? And it completely ignores protective shields. It's not poison, as the Proc brothers said, because Jin's 1000 poison antidote showed no reaction. However, the murky mist exhibited similar effects to those of a potent drug or hallucinogen, so it looked more like an incredibly powerful poison or narcotic. Even the most outstanding members of each faction were not entirely free from the influence of the muddy mist. In other words, only Jin and Muraken were unaffected by the muddy mist on Gaifa. It has affected everyone, but it can't harm us. Neither me nor Muraken. A word passed through Jin's mind. Damn! Of course, the murky aura enveloping the entire island was the energy of a curse. That's why only Jin and Muraken, the contractor and the Black Dragon of Sodaret, remained untouched. Lotta and Faye are cursed. Once I send them away and move alone, I'll have the advantage among all the factions in this situation. Therefore, he was about to tell Muraken that they should fly to another island. Oh, what is this? Suddenly, the muddy mist spread like tentacles from Bouvard. Muraken easily avoided the mist, but the Proc brothers jumped into the muddy mist as if possessed by a spirit. The tentacle-shaped muddy mist transformed into something like a cradle, wrapped around the brothers, and pulled them inside. Chapter 462. It happened in the blink of an eye, and Jin had no chance to catch them. Muraken, let's chase them. Muraken descended rapidly again. Muraken narrowed his wings and descended like a falcon. Darn it! Why is it so fast? He said as he looked at the murky mist cradle surrounding the Proc brothers. The cradle was much faster than Muraken, descending at maximum speed, and it escaped in such a chaotic and bizarre trajectory that could be described as weird. The cradle split into two, each holding one of the brothers, and then merged back into one, repeating its spinning motion. The view outside the murky aura became hazy, and the cradle appeared even more intriguing. Oh, my babies! Did you miss me so much that you came to see me? Right? Moreover, a woman's voice could be heard. It didn't come from the giant mouth of Bouvard formed on the outside, but from inside the murky mist. Now, Jin and Muraken were convinced that the owner of that voice was Amila. Furthermore, they thought that she wouldn't immediately kill Lotta and Faye. If it's not favorable, it's hard to express it in words. It seemed like she considered us as toys or playmates. She said that talking is boring and swung her sword at us. It's embarrassing to admit, but there was a time when I got a cut on my forehead during one of her surprise attacks. Like the conversation the group had when they entered the islands, the part where Amila called them my babies was similar. For Amila, the Proc brothers were adorable toys. She wouldn't easily break them. My babies, sleep well. She even sang a lullaby. Amila's lullaby resonated with the tumultuous cradle and the murky mist, making it seem like they had entered someone's whimsical dream. Who dash? Muraken slowed down. Now, the cradle was no longer visible to Jin and Muraken. That Amila seems to be a headache. I have a feeling that everyone we need these days has a loose screw in their head, like that demon woman Zephyrin. Instead of the cradle, they saw a much thicker and darker mass of murky aura. The cradle had disappeared there. What are you going to do, kid? Would they continue chasing beyond that darkness? Or would they consider other options? There was no need to contemplate. The effect of a murky aura is a curse. In any case, we are immune, and considering that the giant Bouvard is also exhaling, it seems to have some physical destructive power, but it doesn't seem to be at an unbearable level. We'll follow it. But, let's focus on defense and evasion until we can communicate directly with Amila. No counterattacks even if she attacks us. What nonsense is this? Do you remember what Amila said as soon as we arrived at the central island? Dash, you're bothering me too much. She said it through the giant Bouvard, but it was clearly Amila's voice. Why is that? I don't know what happened to Amila when the four main factions arrived here before us, but she expressed that she found them so annoying that she wouldn't mind killing them. It wasn't just something she expressed with words. Runcandle seemed to have no casualties yet, but the factions of Zippel, Kinselo, and Vermont had already suffered irreparable damage. The reason the four main factions gathered here in the first place was to recruit Amila. However, the four main factions that visited the archipelago found themselves in a situation where it wouldn't be strange to have to fight a life-or-death battle with her, let alone recruit her. If the expression bothersome came from an ordinary person, it might be thought that there were other intentions behind it, but the other person is presumed to be tainted by the chaos. Amila seemed perfectly capable of completely ignoring the four main factions for such a trivial reason, even if it meant parting ways with them. Compared to Yona, everyone else outside is already screwed, so there's no need for us to be a bother by provoking Amila, right? Jean explained this, and Murakan sighed when he finished speaking. Ha! Are you saying that this Murakan only takes beatings? How miserable and pitiful. And I haven't heard anything like that from Valkas or Latanim before. With such stories, he referred to Amila's combat style. She is one of the top 3 mercenaries and the best mercenary in the world, recognized even by Valkas for her pure solo skills. Valkas and Lata had encountered her several times on the battlefield, and Valkas, in particular, had said that she was better in warfare than the entire Black King mercenary's body. However, in the descriptions they gave, there was no mention of Amila using curses or that unheard-of murky aura. I only heard about her combat skills, the use of various war equipment that can't be imitated by others, and her brilliant strategic ability. I also heard that she plants so many traps and equipment all over the battlefield that it was hard to believe she was moving alone. I see. So, does that mean Amila was hiding her skills? If she was hiding her skills to that extent and could single-handedly dominate the Black King mercenaries in a war, it would imply that Amila is close to the level of a Genesis Knight. It doesn't seem likely. I think there might be some reason for a change in Amila. A change? Maybe a change occurred because her chaos met Bouvard Gaston's chaos, and it's somehow amplifying. And that's giving Amila an edge over Bouvard. Jean made that judgment based on intuition, but it wasn't entirely unfounded. The giant Bouvard forming on the outside was almost certainly controlled by Amila. There didn't seem to be any reason for Amila to create Bouvard with the murky aura without any particular motive. Or, more precisely, Bouvard's murky mist. As it is a means of controlling Bouvard's chaos, she has no choice but to use its form. Jean soon reached such a conclusion. It seems like a bit of a leap, but it also makes sense. The reason why Amila is particularly interested in the Proc brothers could be due to the chaos. Aren't those snake-eyed guys different from your sister or Amila? They're different, but the father of the 2 brothers is Smarian Proc. He is a person who turned into a monster due to chaos. Perhaps his chaos has some influence on the Proc brothers, and Amila might be feeling sympathy for that. So what about Bouvard? Why does she show favoritism towards the Proc brothers and treats Bouvard that way? That I don't know either. After all, everything I've said so far is just speculation. But Bouvard seems to be the type of person that disgusts everyone. I don't think there has to be any other reason to hate him. Ugh, my head hurts. Whatever it is, we'll have to meet her in person to find out if your hypothesis is correct. Let's go. I'll try not to counterattack. Bang, boom. The distant explosion noises from the outside were getting more intense. The intensity of the battle between the main factions and Amila was increasing. Jean could hear the shouts of the commanders when he focused for a moment. Deploy defense control around the execution knights. I'll clear the way. The commander was hit. Fell back. The murky mist is converging. Follow the best warrior and the Tiger King. I'll kill all red tigers showing their backs. Don't miss the Magic Tower Vice Director's fire. If you step out of the fire, it will corrode the murky mist. Jean could clearly hear their voices despite the considerable distance. It was as if Amila had momentarily decided to listen to their reactions. All right, should I kill everyone except my darlings? That would be fine, right, darlings? Amila spoke with unwavering confidence. Despite facing the 4 main forces, she not only expected to win but was convinced she would win. Listening to the voices from outside, it seems like Amila is overwhelming them. With that in mind, Jean was even more certain. He believed that, for some reason, Amila possessed a much greater power than usual. Even though they hadn't sent all the flag-bearers from each faction, there were very few individuals in the world who could single-handedly dominate people of that caliber. It was an impossible feat even considering that Gaifa was the base of Amala and based on the descriptions of Valkas and Lada. Muraken's black wings silently cut through the misty aura. As they entered the misty aura where the cradle had disappeared, Jin's vision shifted from being nebulous to complete darkness. The darkness didn't dissipate even when Jin formed a flame in the palm of his hand. They continued forward with their mind's eyes open to the maximum. They could hear distant chants and hums from inside, as well as the sound of someone whispering in a strangely pleasant manner. Kukuku, you're the elder brother, you're the little sister. I'm the Demon King. It was as if a child absorbed in playing with dolls was talking to himself. A shiver ran down Jin's spine, but at the same time, it eerily reminded him of Yona. Amala's humming gradually approached, and as it approached, the darkness of the murky aura gradually dissipated. There was a bright space in the distance, and Jin and Muraken naturally understood that it was the core of the mist, covering the entire island. Amala was sitting in the center of it all. She wore a camouflage outfit commonly used by mercenaries, but this outfit, made of grass and twigs, had such a large weave that it was hard to compare it to ordinary clothes. As a result, Amala didn't seem to be wearing clothes. It was more like she was completely hidden within a round bush. Her two hands protruded from her camouflage and toyed with small wooden dolls that looked like figures. There were a total of 3 wooden dolls, and Jin immediately understood what each of them represented. They were the Proc brothers and Bouvard. Each of the figures corresponded to the real people standing in front of Amala and moved as they touched them. But Bouvard is transparent as if it were a soul. While the Proc brothers seemed like themselves, Bouvard took on a luminous and ethereal form. Bouvard's doll was placed far from the Proc brothers' dolls and seemed to be throwing punches, which seemed to be the actions of the giant Bouvard on the outside. Meanwhile, the dolls of the Proc brothers were seen drinking tea and conversing. Muraken transformed back into his human form. Amala turned her head, in surprise when Muraken and Jin touched solid ground. She had no idea that Muraken and Jin had come so far. "Huh? What's going on? How did you survive to get here?" said Amala with reddened eyes. She seemed completely bewildered and tilted her head as if she didn't understand anything. Chapter 463. Boom! As soon as Amala finished speaking, something resembling a sword shot out from the murky fog that gathered behind her. Jin and Muraken easily dodged it, as if they had expected it. I knew she had a side like the older sister Yona, but this person seems even crazier than I expected. The blades of the murky fog struck where Jin and Muraken had been. Just by seeing how they cut through the ground like water, one could tell that this attack was not just for intimidation. Muraken instinctively tried to counterattack but restrained himself. He recalled Jin's words, emphasizing focusing on defense and avoiding attacks until they could communicate with Amala. Arg, damn it, it's annoying to keep dodging like this. Not even 5 seconds had passed when more than 100 swords aimed at Jin and Muraken. Amala sat there, controlling the entire process with gestures and small hand movements. It's as if she's a god in this area, Jin thought when a blade flew right in front of him and he swatted it away. The blade fragments didn't fall to the ground but flew towards Jin. It was something that couldn't be done with aura or mana. It was a move that could only be achieved with a special type of power, the power of chaos. Humph! Dodging? You're fast. Let's see how long you can keep dodging. The number of blades formed in the air began to rapidly increase. Even with a rough estimate, it was more than double than before, and all these swords pressed on Jin and Muraken from all sides. It was impossible to dodge or break them all with bare hands, even with all their efforts. Amala rolled her eyes and stomped in frustration. As a result, the entire area began to dangerously vibrate, and the blades multiplied again, now exceeding 500. Swish! It was impossible to evade or deflect so many blades, even for Jin. So he unsheathed Sigmund. Heh! Look, you can't just take it out because you're annoyed, can you? I took it out to defend myself, so bear with it a little longer. Woo! At the same time, more than 500 swords shot out, blocking Jean and Muraken's view. However, in the next moment, Jean executed the Sword of Legends technique, Petal Cascade and Thunderbolt, effortlessly shattering all the swords formed by the murky aura. Jean destroyed the projectiles just like when they first entered this space, leaving Amala visibly bewildered. Why aren't they affected? Why aren't they going crazy? She still ignored that Jean was a 1,000-year contractor. In fact, she didn't even know who these men in front of her were. She didn't know who Jean Runcandle and the Black Dragon Muraken were, nor the turmoil they had caused in the world recently. In short, Amala had little interest in worldly affairs, as Valeria had expressed in her past life. Great mercenary Amala, I am Jean Runcandle, the 12th flag-bearer of Runcandle. A Runcandle? Yes. Still, I can't let you live. Zippel and Kinselo and the Imperial troops killing each other under the curse, they were over 1,000. If Amala had cared about the aftermath, she wouldn't have committed such an act. You really are someone who doesn't care about rumors. As Jean retorted, the shape of the swords suspended in the air began to change and transform into a new form. The newly transformed weapons no longer looked like blades. They now looked like cannons. Cannons? All the cannons that could be seen in large-scale wars were aimed at Jean and Muraken. Bang! Boom! Unlike normal cannons, these cannons made of murky aura didn't need to be loaded with ammunition. Amala's will constantly formed and fired projectiles at high speed. The barrage of projectiles from these cannons made it impossible for Jean and Muraken to see anything in front of them. It seemed that traversing these cannons without Bradamanti's shadow energy armor would require battle god techniques or decisive killing moves, or something similar. But Lotta and Faye might be in danger if I do that. Bouvard felt like a soul without a physical body, but there was no need to worry about him getting injured even if he did. And it wasn't clear if Amala would protect her beloved toys even in extreme situations. I'd like to resolve it with the Sword of Legends even if it involves using force. Shadow energy. Jean initially drew Sigmund instead of Bradamanti out of habit to minimize the exposure of shadow energy to others, but also due to his past experience. I lose control when I see shadow energy. You don't have to apologize because I never told you. Haha, I thought you'd hide that power from me, at least, until you became a flag-bearer. During his time as a potential flag-bearer, Yona almost killed Jean in the place where he first encountered shadow energy. There were no guarantees that Amala would react the same way as Yona, but it was better to be cautious. Jean had come to her to make her an ally, but at this point Jean himself was defenseless. He never thought it would be impossible to have a conversation to this extent. The cannonade stopped for a moment, not because Amala was tired, but because she wanted to check if Jean and Muraken were finished. I'm sick of this. I'm trying so hard to kill you. Shouldn't that mean you have to die? Of course, both of them were standing there and seemed perfectly fine. The aura shield had been seriously damaged, more than a tattered rag. Jean and Amala locked eyes. You seem pretty calm for someone who claims to have tried so hard. You're not even breathing hard. While Jean and Muraken had used up their energy to create the shield, Amala's weapons remained unscathed, despite the massive barrage of cannon fire she unleashed. That's right. My power is infinite in this place. So why don't we end this without draining each other? Just so you know, that strange lightning sword of yours can't touch me. Suddenly, a dagger materialized in Amala's hand. It's fascinating. She could form anything with the murky fog, especially here. As expected, Amala temporarily gains transcendental power due to some special effect. Without hesitation, Amala cut her left wrist with the dagger. However, the murky aura splattered from the cut wrist, protruding from her thick clothing, instead of blood, and immediately reformed her clone. You're quite resilient, Amala. Muraken shook his head. Normally, that kind of rapid regeneration is the specialty of demonic creatures and demons. But now it seems even humans do it. Hey, did I get your name right? Amala? You should be careful or you'll die for real. No matter where you go, those who are going to die are you. I just want to give you the opportunity to die comfortably. And I hope you stop bothering my cuties and wasting my precious time. I've done everything in my power to be as polite as possible, Amala. So allow me one more question before we finish. Is there any faction among those currently on the Gaifa Islands that is allied with you? The four main factions were still fighting outside with the colossal form of Bouvard controlled by Amila, but Jean asked the question on purpose. Forming an alliance might not stop the attacks, and it wouldn't be surprising given her personality. Why do you want to know that? I came here like the others from outside, wanting to recruit you. I've heard that you wander the world, seeking adventures and searching for something. I think it might be related to this murky aura, the chaos. Do you know anything about chaos? I don't know much. Then we can't be friends. Jin's gaze turned to Bouvard's soul, which was furiously pounding the air and exhaling breath. Are you friends with Bouvard Gaston? Jean asked in a calm tone as if asking a child. A while ago, Jean believed that Bouvard had come with Kinselo and had been captured by Amila. However, unlike the Proc brothers, Bouvard seemed to be only a spirit-like form, so it might not be the case. Kinselo probably has much more information about chaos than I do, and Bouvard, who looks like a spirit, might be some form of chaos. Or a sculpture, amplifying Amila's power. Amila reluctantly nodded. Well, yes. It seems she had no choice but to confirm it. She befriended Bouvard in her quest for information about chaos, even though she had no desire to be close to him. Jin's gaze turned cold upon hearing her answer. So, you've sided with Kinselo. I'm not entirely sure about that. Wait, why are you interrogating me like this? I can kill you. I asked this question to determine if I can kill you, great mercenary Amila. A sudden crack appeared in the ground where Jean stood. Jean channeled his energy, and the air around him became oppressively heavy, and the shining Bradamanti sword emerged from its sheath. Jean hadn't come to these lands with the idea of recruiting Amila unconditionally. I must recruit her. If recruiting her is impossible, at least I must keep her in check. As he told Valkaz, Jean had considered the possibility of her becoming an enemy. In that case, he would have to decide whether to kill her, spare her, or incapacitate her to face their enemies. Jin's choice would depend on the extent of her power. It was definitely the first option, given this level of power. How many Runcandles would die when the day came for the Runcandle family to face Kinselo in a large-scale battle? And if Amila, with her nearly infinite power, entered the battlefield? To prevent such a future, Jean had no choice but to kill Amila. You didn't welcome me when I entered your territory, but I don't hold it against you. Even if you had rejected my offer more politely, my decision wouldn't have changed if you had become friends with my enemies. I hope you don't hate me for this. Swish! The Bradamanti sword turned black as it infused with shadow energy. At that moment, Amila's eyes widened. Shadow energy? Then, you're the 1,000-year contractor by any chance? Amila quickly began firing the cannons in response to Jin's actions. However, Jean, protected by his shadow energy armor, advanced through the cannonades and swung Bradamanti towards Amila. Chapter 464, The Black Sword, infused with shadow energy, pierced through the dense group and aimed directly at Amila. Each strike was aimed at vital points. Jin's eyes sparkled amidst the torn and bright cannon shots, indicating one thing. Jean was truly determined to kill Amila. Amila startled, and a shiver ran down her spine at the vivid murderous intent that seemed to materialize into something resembling a dark and venomous mass. Slash! Their eyes met. Jean and Amila clashed their weapons, competing with each other's strength. The aura cannons and Bradamanti collided, creating an unpleasant sound of friction. It seems he won't lose his sanity like Sister Yona when seeing shadow energy. Is it because of the type and size of the chaos or something else? The exact reason wasn't clear, but it didn't matter in the heat of battle. In fact, it would have been more convenient if she had lost her sanity, since she hadn't been able to fully utilize her abilities. Jean pulled back the sword that was in contact with the cannon barrel and tried to swing it again, but he felt something hard entwining with Bradamanti. They were thorns. They appeared on the cannon, out of nowhere, and the cannon looked like a hedgehog. And the thorns entangled and clung to Bradamanti. There was a moment when he tried to forcefully remove them. Of course, Amila didn't let it go to waste and detonated a bomb over Jin's head. It was a bomb she conjured in an instant using the muddy aura. The explosion seemed capable of bursting eardrums, but it caused no real damage thanks to the runes and Myelta's armor. Meanwhile, Muraken tried to protect Lada and Faye, but suddenly felt something unknown and dangerous under his feet as he ran. He quickly moved out of the way. If he had been a moment slower, he would have suffered significant injuries because explosions were happening beneath his feet. How strange! How come the bombs explode under the ground? Muraken looked at the strangely excavated ground and clicked his tongue. Valkas had informed him in advance about these attack patterns. She had a wide variety of tactics. Bombs exploding from below, arrows shot at different intervals, various traps and complex devices. Normally, these kinds of things require preparation and a considerable amount of time, but the unlimited muddy fog made it possible. Weapons and traps were continuously forming in all directions according to her will. Bombs, mines, huge pendulums, spiked nets, rapid-fire crossbows, and much more. If it had been anyone other than Jean and Muraken, maybe a warrior or a magician below 10 stars, they would have been defenseless. The result would probably have been the same even if an entire order of renowned knights or a magical corps had come. However, their compatibility was at least unfavorable. There were no openings, as her curses had no effect on Jean and Muraken, and the weapons and explosives she wielded were suitable for mass destruction but not for piercing the defenses of high-level warriors or magicians. Of course, she had the infinite power of the muddy aura, so her compatibility didn't seem to matter at all. Amila was sure she would win as long as the battle continued until one of them perished, because her opponent would eventually tire. Swish! Bradamanti traced a sharp arc. Despite the overwhelming cannonades and traps, Jean kept closing the distance with evasive maneuvers and his Shadow Force armor. The way he reacts to my attacks is nothing compared to high-level knights I know. If she had fought without prior preparation and completely exposed, Amila wouldn't have been able to defeat Jean even without her infinite power. She would be a very difficult opponent if it weren't for her infinite power and high-speed regeneration. Jean believed in Tessa's flames. The blue flames had already proven their worth when he cut through the gates of Hell and Zephyrn's subspace. If the space, acting as the core of the murky aura, was the source of Amila's infinite power, he could deal with that too. If the situation couldn't be resolved through the pressure of the flames, he would demolish the island entirely. Or even if he had to destroy the entire archipelago off the face of the earth. Jean was determined to settle things with Amila. However, there was something strange. Why is she fighting so recklessly? Jean wondered. Amila kept dodging or blocking Jin's attacks, as if she didn't have the ability of rapid regeneration. Given the level of rapid regeneration she had demonstrated moments ago, Amila could fully utilize the give flesh, take bone strategy. She could intentionally allow attacks to create an opening, catch the opponent off guard, or occasionally attempt self-destruction. Jean expected her to fight. That way if she had high-speed regeneration. Instead, she gritted her teeth and hastily dodged the black blades. Could it be that she couldn't bear the pain, despite the rapid regeneration? But that didn't explain why she had demonstrated her high-speed regeneration by voluntarily cutting her left wrist. Could it be? Jean squinted his eyes within the Myelta rune. He quickly glanced at Muraken and saw bombs and shields constantly forming with the murky aura. Muraken refrained from recklessly breaking through, fearing that the Proc brothers might get injured, but Jean could see how the shadow energy was breaking through the gaps in the muddy aura. And every time the shadow energy emerged in that way, Jean noticed a slight change in Amila's breathing. It was as if she was barely suppressing her fear. She couldn't deceive herself. Unlike ordinary warriors, fear was an inevitable weakness that couldn't be fooled or hidden when facing someone like Jean. Wounds caused by shadow energy can't heal. Can they, Amila? Amila's two eyes widened within the hood of her bushy clothes. How did he know? She was about to shout it out in surprise, but she managed to swallow it the next instant. Bradamanti's fierce thrust hadn't hit her shoulder. A piece of her shoulder armor fell as leaves and branches shattered around her. Bright red drops of blood splattered amid all of it. Amila hadn't reacted correctly to the blow. However, Her shoulder armor was instantly repaired by the mud aura. But Jean hadn't missed the moment just before the leaves and twigs formed. Her shoulder isn't regenerating. The fact that the armor on her shoulder regenerated before her actual shoulder was an order of unnatural regeneration. Therefore, Jean was convinced that his assumption was correct. The chaos energy, or at least part of the chaos abilities that Amela possessed, could be neutralized by shadow energy. Look at this. The charlatan has fallen silent. A sharp blue flame swirled over the shadow energy surrounding the sword. I'll make sure you don't suffer too much. Shadow energy and blue flames were growing stronger. Amela stared fixedly at the sword pointing at her without the slightest tremor, but she had an intuition. If this continues, I will definitely die. Amela had experienced many battlefields throughout her life. The Great Mercenary, the embodiment of the battlefield, Gaifa's Nightmare, and so on. The titles that followed her represented the kind of life she lived. There were intense battles where she felt suffocated, and there were battlefields as comfortable as playgrounds. She liked war, but she had never felt such an intense threat of death before. Like many titles, the names Amela acquired didn't represent the depth of her nature. In other words, the reason she showed little interest in the world despite having lived through many wars, and to top it off, the reason she didn't even know the name of the person who had stirred the world for the past few years, Jean Runcandle. The chaos. Amela had always heard the voice of chaos resonating within her. Chaos prevented her from merging with a conventional life and protected her from being too absorbed in the lives of others. The Proc brothers were exceptions because they had this scent of chaos. No one had taught her what loneliness was in a life of war and death, and it was very hard to find someone strong enough to teach and guide her on the battlefield. Even if they were to meet, there was no room to form such bonds in a place where people use evil to kill each other. The power of chaos had covered many emotions that she should have naturally felt. In a way, Amela was like a child abandoned alone in her own world. Thanks to the power of chaos, she had naturally become a mercenary, but in reality, she wasn't much different from a wild beast. I'm scared. I don't want to die. To some, it might seem amusing that Amela wished to live. After all, she had killed countless people on the battlefield and rarely forgave those who annoyed her. But was it really the will of a poor newborn abandoned in a well? Or was it the will of chaos? One thing was certain. No one had guided Amela throughout her life. Now, shadow energy and blue flames were not only emerging but pushing the fire outward. Kid, I saved the Snake Eyes brothers. Let's destroy him now. While Amela was terrified and losing focus, Muraken was able to rescue the Proc brothers. There was no need to hold back their power any longer. Your lifelong fame won't even come close to being enough compared to this sword. The blue flames and the force of the shadows, which had spread in all directions, quickly converged toward Jean. Soon, Jean became the embodiment of the blue flames. Sarah Runcandle's secret sword technique, Hellfire Flame. Jean looked at Amela with his fiery eyes. The blue flames illuminated his face, hidden by the bushy hood. Amela had an incredibly young face, almost too young for someone of the same age as Valka's. For some reason, Jean felt uncomfortable. Despite having become accustomed to a world where life and death were constantly at stake. What a waste that this wasn't a better encounter. Jean cleared his mind and focused on wielding his sword to unleash the blue flames, but at that precise moment, I surrender. Suddenly, Amela extended both hands and shouted wildly, shaking her head in the process. I surrender. I was wrong. Please stop. Even more astonishingly, Amela sat down and frantically shook her head. What? Amela's sudden actions triggered a myriad of thoughts in Jin's mind. Is it a trap to escape the situation? Or is she really surrendering? Even if it's the latter, is it right to spare her? Amela has already decided to join Kinsalo, hasn't she? Jean would face severe injuries if he forcibly stopped the half-unleashed blue flames. However, Jean made a decision. He would spare her for now and listen to her. But he couldn't stop the blue flames. Muraken! Bradamanti was imbued with blue flames rushing towards Amela, and Jean gritted his teeth and called out the name of his dragon guardian. Chapter 465. Jean barely twisted the sword. If he hadn't changed the trajectory, the blade would have cut and burned Amela in a single blow. Jean felt relieved for saving Amela, but he was worried about whether Murakin could withstand the hellfire. Ah, this is insane. Indeed, Murakin is Jin's dragon guardian. He knew exactly what Jean wanted even though Jean only called him by his name. Murakin lunged towards Amela and quickly transformed into his true form. I just saved the snake eyes, and now you suddenly ask me to take care of her too. Boom! Murakin swung his front paw and threw Amela towards the Proc brothers. Amela bounced like a ball, and the sound of her bones breaking echoed, but she regenerated instantly. If she had been touched by the hellfire, she wouldn't have been able to regenerate. The moment she fell among the Proc brothers, she instinctively knew she could survive. I surrender, please stop. The reason Amela told that to Jean was out of intuition. She felt she wouldn't survive if she moved her body recklessly out of fear or tried to resist forcefully. Somehow, she had a feeling that if she pleaded like this, to Jean he might extend a helping hand. Her intuition hit the mark. Roar! Murakin had no choice but to exert all his strength in the lower belly and roar like a madman. It was because shadow energy and blue flames were spreading like a tsunami from Bradamanti. Now Murakin had taken Amela's place and bore the hellfire. The blue flames quickly covered the core of the muddy mist and the space they occupied at great speed. The muddy mist surrounding them rapidly retreated as if insects were hiding from the light. That meant that the hellfire Murakin had to block was enormous. Murakin's amber eyes were stained black by the shadow energy. The curtain of shadow energy he created was even denser than the blue flames. But the blue flames tore through the curtain too easily. However, when the curtain tore, it immediately reformed and continued blocking the incoming flames. Boy, stop, please. Every time the curtain tore, the hellfire got closer and closer to Murakin, like a burning rope. For the first time in a long time, Murakin thought, no matter how big I was, my best moment had already passed, and if something like that hits me, directly with a body that hasn't fully recovered. Murakin shuddered and shook his head. He thought he might have to endure Misha's torture under the pretext of treating a minor injury, or even something worse. Maybe I only have a minor or moderate injury, and I could spend a happy and pleasant time receiving care from Strawberry Pie. Maybe I'm worrying too much about the boys' flames? The moment Murakin thought that, the fire that became even fiercer dyed his vision blue. He was so dumbfounded that he burst into laughter. It was impossible for that to happen. If he didn't stop it with all his might, it could become a stain that could never be erased from the history of the great Black Dragon Murakin. The Black Dragon Murakin, gravely injured by being struck by his contractor's sword, was he really the king of the sky 1,000 years ago? The testimony of the fire dragon Kadin, of Keliark Zippel, he's actually weak. Is it the truth? Jean Runcandle, as Soderet's contractor, severely punishes the negligent dragon guardian and establishes the hierarchy as Runcandle. The 12th flag-bearer defeated his dragon guardian with a single sword. Who protects whom? Many dragon guardians in the world, including the Black Dragon Murakin, should be cautious. Murakin instantly thought of a future where such senseless articles flooded the world. He couldn't bear such disgrace, having reigned as the king of the sky for over 3,000 years. He would rather die than live with such humiliation. The curtain of shadow energy was no longer able to block the hellfire. The flames pierced through the torn curtain, and Murakin had no choice but to accept it, protecting his body with shadow energy. He howled in pain as the flames touched his scales. He felt a terrible pain, as if needles were piercing and scratching his entire body. Roar! His heavy black body trembled as he pushed away the flames. Even his tightly clenched teeth trembled unstably, and he felt as if a cold sweat was dripping down his scales. His wrinkled face distorted even more due to the effort. He was convinced that if he took a single step back, it would be the end. He wasn't going to die, but Amela would be reduced to ashes, and not even bones would be left. Murakin! Jean called Murakin again with a worried heart. Don't talk to me, because it breaks my concentration. Sorry. Jean was reabsorbing some of the energy used in Hellfire while avoiding internal injuries. However, the technique was so vast, and he executed it with all his might, that it was like trying to pour spilled wine back into the bottle. He might be able to collect a few drops, but most of it was already gone. Sigh. This Amala or whatever should be worth as much. Even though she looked like a grasshopper. Now wait, what is this sound? Bang. An unsettling sound, as if something was breaking or shattering, came from the depths of his chest. It was close to the heart. And it wasn't the first time Murakan had heard something like that. Damn it, my heart. He heard a similar sound when his heart was shattered by Timar. His scales stood on end due to the imminent anxiety. But something strange was happening. If there were a crack in the heart, his strength should weaken rapidly. But instead, it feels like something is welling up like an endless spring, or like an oil well bursting in the middle of the desert. The power he had used to block the flames and protect himself was now sprouting from the heart. He felt the pleasure and fullness of shadow energy surging from the heart and spreading throughout his body. He felt a tingling sensation down his spine. This will be my old strength. My strength. What shattered near his heart was a security mechanism created by his detested sister, Misha. When Misha had operated on him, she had implemented a security mechanism to prevent him from using too much energy and damaging his heart again. At that time, Misha considered 40% to be a safe limit. She thought that if he used more than 40% of his old strength, his heart, which had started to recover, might break again. Now, Murakan had involuntarily released one of the security mechanisms because he felt very threatened. Moreover, the reason the security mechanism unlocked was not because Murakan had forced himself to use more strength in response to danger. It was because the heart had already recovered to the point Misha had initially foreseen, a safety limit of 50%. A 10% difference is by no means small. Like the gap between 10 stars and 9 stars is like the sky. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Suddenly, Murakan burst into laughter. The murky aura, which had receded because of the flames, disappeared completely, and the core they were in cracked like shattered glass, and the Gaifa Islands regained their original colors. In other words, the sky opened completely. The figure of the giant Bouvard standing in the middle of the central island, intimidating the four main forces, began to turn transparent as if it would soon disappear. The giant Bouvard almost stopped moving from the moment Jean faced Amala in the first place. But now it's about to disappear completely. Amidst this, the entire island shook with Murakan's laughter. The forces of the four main factions fighting with all their might were left dumbfounded. This sound, sixth flag bearer. This is the voice of the guardian deity of the family, Murakanim. Could it be the younger one? Vigo and the Runcandle Knights also widened their eyes. The Black Dragon Murakan? Jean Runcandle is here too. Commander, the contractors among the Imperial magicians have told us to unconditionally avoid the Black Dragon if we encounter him during a mission. Even the Fire Dragon and the Blue Dragon of Zippel were afraid and fled at the time of the recent Black King's incident. Vermont members were also frightened. Wow, Tiger King. Oh, I can't stand because my legs are numb. You stupid red-tailed bastards. Don't you get it? Tiger King. If even you tremble at seeing this. Oh, what would happen if the mighty Tiger King also gets scared? You guys, you surely tremble too. Well, if you come closer, I can smell the scent of the Legends tribe. We have to run. The Kinsalo Beastmen, especially the Red Tiger tribe, immediately became terrified and fell into an extreme panic. Unlike the White Wolf tribe, the Red Tiger tribe only has good fighting power but lacks the spirit of a warrior. It's also a racial characteristic, but the Red Tiger tribe had a more sensitive intuition to fear or crisis than the White Wolf tribe. Ha! Black Dragon? Then, Jean Runcandle is here. Finally, Zippel among them. Midder Elner gritted his teeth with red eyes as soon as he heard Murakan's laughter. Who are Jean Runcandle and Murakan? They are the archenemies of Myron Zippel, his most beloved brother in the world. Even the Fire Dragon Theo and the Blue Dragon Lalamakwa just withdrew after encountering Murakan. We have to retreat, Tower Master. Seeing that the giant form has disappeared, it's very likely that the great mercenary Amala has already been defeated by Murakan. Midir ignited the flames with his mana. Seventh Tower Master. Stand firm. The magicians of the Seventh Magic Tower, both elders and commanders, tried to stop Midir, but there was a woman, laughing at Midir. Midir watched her warily, even as his anger boiled over his head. If Lady Sandra tells us to retreat, we will. Ha ha ha. Anyway, you're well-trained, bastard. Are you still aware of me in this situation, I'm quite satisfied. Her name was Sandra Zippel, Keliark's daughter. The moment Sandra smiled and tried to say something, rumble. Suddenly, the earthquake that shook the entire island became even more powerful. It was a phenomenon that occurred when Murakan pushed away the hellfire he was blocking with his body. And unintentionally, he also unlocked the security mechanism of his heart. It rose into the sky with the flame of hell. Moreover, the flames mixed with Murakan's shadow energy and became darker, so there were not many traces of blue flames. I am Murakan, Murakan shouted as he threw the flame he held to the ground. People had no choice but to mistakenly think that it was some kind of technique Murakan was using, not Jean. Avoid! Behind the Tiger King, no. Behind the best warriors. Let the white wolves take care of the red tigers. Barrier, barrier. Hurry. Curse. Gather to create a barrier. The forces of the four main factions had no choice but to be scared at the sight of the flames thrown by Murakan. Chapter 66. A black tidal wave, seemingly originating from the sky, was engulfing the land. From the perspective of the four main factions, it seemed like the ruthless black tidal wave was about to devastate the entire island, and they hurriedly raised protective shields. The strong pressure from the blue flames crushed them as if a mountain weighed on them. Crack! Enormous cracks formed all over the island even before the flames touched the ground. So the onlookers couldn't help but think that this would be the end of the world. Indeed, if the protective shield of the four main factions couldn't withstand it, the flames Murakan had unleashed had enough power to ravage the entire island. This was because some kind of power boost had occurred. In other words, Murakan's shadow energy, which had just recovered 50% of power, was added to Jin's blue flames. Instead of consuming and neutralizing each other, the blue flames and the shadow energy combined as if they had been aiming for it from the beginning, unfolding an even more formidable force. The blue flames that Jin had unleashed on his own had the power to turn the guardian knights present in the Garden of Swords into ashes if Luncia hadn't stopped it. Not to mention that now Murakan's power was added to the blue flames. Of course, it still wasn't comparable to what Sarah had executed at her best, but it had reached a level close to that. In other words, among the four main factions visiting the Gaifa Islands, there was no one who could single-handedly block the hellfire. Woo, woo dash! The blue flames began to sweep the ground. As soon as the edge of the black tidal wave began to sweep the protective shields, the people on the ground shuddered in fear and shock. Even the protective shields on which the first divisions of the four main factions had put all their effort were breaking as easily as dry leaves. Boom! Crunch puff! Fragments of the shattered protective shield bounced and reflected the light. The blue flames took less than a second to envelop everything in darkness. Aya! Screams echoed simultaneously. The blue flames turned everything they touched into ashes. The whole body burned with just a touch of the fingertip, and it was impossible to escape due to the pressure of the blue flames. Even if there was a chance to escape, it seemed almost meaningless. Humans under the black tidal wave felt like they were in hell, and the terrible black dragon Murakan laughed maniacally as he watched humans burn. Actually, he was looking in another direction, as if he were the god of that hell. Ha ha ha! Ha 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 ha! Ha ha! Murakan laughed with uncontrollable joy, but the humans on the ground couldn't accept it that way. A terrifying existence that could massacre the first division of the four main forces like stomping on ants. Arg! Bastard, do you really have to fight against something like this? If you provoke that black dragon, things could get very bad. I can recommend any other method if you want to be like Myron Oriboni, shouted Sandra as she pushed away the blue flames using ice-type magic. Sweat streamed down her face like rain as she warded off the black flames. Every day I imagined killing that man. They are the enemies of my older brother Myron. Midir protected himself and the surrounding mages using spatial explosions and fire-type magic. Is that so? The enemies of Myron Oriboni. Huh? It's hard to find a funny guy like you. You speak as if your older brother is dead. Contrary to what she said, Sandra was not sarcastic at all. Instead, she spoke with a strangely cheerful tone. Well, do whatever you want. I don't think you can wake up from the dead with your skills. I was also looking forward to meeting Jean Runcandle at least once. Ah! Suddenly, Sandra screamed as the flames intensified without warning. All the higher-level mages, who couldn't respond quickly to the sudden change near Sandra, disappeared, lost in the force of the shadows. Zippel's side lost almost half of the mages due to a single amplification. However, Sandra simply smiled. Heh! I almost fell too. It's fascinating, really? The situation on Kinzelo's side was even worse. Unlike the White Wolf warriors, the Red Tigers were not helping cope with the situation. In fact, beyond that, there were many Red Tigers not only stumbling aimlessly but also dragging White Wolf warriors to death like water ghosts. Crazy red bastards. Let them go. Let them go. Save me. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. What do you mean you won't do it again? Save me too, Arg. My relatives are dying because of you, bastards. In the end, the best warriors of the White Wolf tribe had no choice but to use their maces to strike down the Red Tigers standing in their way. They would undoubtedly be annihilated if they didn't. Occasionally, those who reached the level of Tiger King would counterattack, but their frenzied claw strikes posed no real threat to the members of the White Wolf tribe. Despite the two races not getting along well, the White Wolf warriors had no choice but to lament the death of the Red Tigers. Damn! Soldiers destined for a great cause die in vain like this. They don't know the common Red Tiger warriors, but losing the Tiger King so absurdly was a particularly painful loss. The Tiger King is a title given only to those who have fighting power equal to the best warriors of the White Wolf tribe. The heads and bodies of the Red Tigers flew in all directions and were lost in black flames. Even the White Wolf warriors, who had relatively weaker combat power, were still dying. While Kinzelo wandered through hell within the chaos, the members of Vermont were also going through a terrible time. It was ridiculous to fight with Amila all the time, but now it's the Black Dragon Murakan. Latz, the leader of the 3rd Division of the Special Forces, gritted his teeth as he thought about it. Like other factions, Vermont members had never imagined such a situation when heading to Gaifa. Who would have imagined that Amila would engage in combat with the 4 main factions, even going as far as casting a curse? He also thought that there wouldn't be a large-scale war, even if there was a minor conflict among the 4 main factions, because it was clear that everyone was too cautious about provoking each other, as sending many troops to assert dominance was acceptable, but actual combat caused significant losses. Regardless of who ended up with Amila, they would have preferred to negotiate if possible. But he never thought that such a large-scale attack would occur. And even though it was only the beginning of the attack, Murakan was already overwhelming the 4 main factions. Rats and other team leaders felt an overwhelming sense of dread as they watched their members die ceaselessly. It wasn't just a few casualties. It was impossible to calculate how much time and resources would be needed to replenish the number of Special Forces members. It was uncertain whether he would be able to survive and return to the Empire. Zippel, Kinzelo, and Vermont. These 3 factions naturally considered the Hellfire to be Murakan's technique, but Runcandle had a different opinion. This is not Murakanim's power. It's the younger one's power. Vigo cut through the flames and swallowed dry saliva. Although it was somewhat different from what he had shown during the Patriarchal Declaration, Vigo was very aware that the Hellfire was a secret technique of the magic sword. It has more power than what Sister Luncia stopped at that time, but this is definitely the younger brother's sword technique, not Murakan's. A chill ran down his spine, as if a chilling blade had swept across his back. Vigo also felt a strange mix of emotions, such as admiration, shame, self-doubt, and fighting spirit, which he found hard to describe. It was because the black tidal wave of hellfire was spreading particularly weakly towards Runkandle. Of course, it was controlled by Muraken, but Vigo mistakenly believed that Jean was being considerate of him and the family. In any case, Runkandle hadn't suffered a single loss unlike other forces. In other words, the Runkandle Knights believed that their lives depended on Jean. If Jean wanted to kill them, they would die, and if he wanted to spare them, they would live. Yes, feel it, insignificant fools. Feel the power of the mighty black dragon and die, for that will be the best moment of your useless lives. Muraken momentarily stopped laughing and spoke. He had an expression of great satisfaction on his face as he watched the chaos unfolding below. He was savoring his enhanced power. He felt a surge of joy and burst into uncontrollable laughter. His wide-open mouth gave him an undignified look, but luckily, no one could see his face due to the hellfire. Only one person, Jean, looked at him and sighed in relief. It seems he has suddenly become incredibly strong. I wonder what's going on. It's like some restrictions have disappeared. Regardless of the reason, it was a fortunate turn of events. Amila was saved, Muraken became stronger, and an unexpected situation was created where they overwhelmed the four main factions. Jean quickly racked his brain to see how to make the most of the situation. He didn't need to think too much. Amila. Yes. No. Well, thanks for saving me. I'll hear your greetings and details after the situation is over. Instead, I'll give you a suggestion. Tell me anything. I won't be friends with Bouvard and Kinselo anymore, but your friend. It's a matter for later. It's also important if I can accept you as a friend. Anyway, hide. Nya. Jean summoned Shuri from the ruby. As soon as Amila saw Shuri, her eyes lit up just like when she saw the Proc brothers. She'll help you. Hide as quickly as you can before this mess ends. Stay near the battlefield and don't come out until I say it's safe. Jean intended to treat Amila as a dead person. Since Amila had already turned her back on the four main factions, Jean decided it would be better to treat her as deceased and secretly include her in his faction. Of course, that would be after he could trust Amila, but after the extinction of the blue flames, there would be no chance for Amila to hide. With this creature? Seriously? Can I take the cuties with me too? No. And if you try to deceive me or escape, then no matter where you are or who is protecting you, I will surely find you and kill you. No way. See you later. Nya. Naya. Amila mounted Shuri and departed. Jean could see that Bouvard's soul, which had been bound to the Proc brothers, was rapidly fading away. I will listen to Amila directly about that. Now, let's clear the place. Jean and Muraken's gazes met. Then, Jean conveyed the next message to Muraken as he uttered the words. Now prepare the third comment, Muraken. Chapter 467. Halo? Do you mean using this body as a halo? Yes. The four forces will gather at the Gaifa Islands. Great figures will come as representatives. So you don't want to be overshadowed among them, is that what you're saying? Exactly. It's also important to be prepared for any unexpected situation. Well, I guess I can do that. Anyway, are you ready to go? Come back after helping Gilly. I will prepare some comments for you to use according to various situations in Gaifa. Comments? What kind of comments? I'll tell you later. A conversation they had just before departing from Tychon to Gaifa. The reason for preparing the comments in advance was that this place, where the four main factions gathered to compete, was the perfect opportunity to create favorable rumors. It was rumored that the 12th flag-bearer and his guardian dragon already had great power, to the point that they could be said to have reached the throne of Runkandle. The need for a halo was not just a word thrown out to please Muraken. Muraken already possessed all the necessary aspects. The legitimacy and symbolism of being venerated as the guardian deity of Runkandle, past greatness that no one could surpass, and the uniqueness of being the Black Dragon. There's only one thing Muraken lacks: the present dignity. However, even that had been unintentionally exaggerated by the recent Black Dragon incident. So it was necessary to continue with the same momentum. If he demonstrates his prowess in battle a few more times, Mirakin will become a halo that shines brighter than anyone else. And Jean is very satisfied that the situation has turned out this way. The situation has deviated a bit from what I expected because Amila was already embroiled in a battle with the four main factions, and due to the blue flames, it has involuntarily become fiercer, but it's better. To the point where I wonder if there could have been a better situation. Like the Black King incident, it's a perfect scenario to spread rumors with a touch of deception. The time Jean spent considering the phrases to use while holding the disobedient black dragon suddenly felt rewarded. Third comment? Mirakin raised an eyebrow. Yes, the third comment. Jean raised 3 fingers and squinted, to which Mirakin nodded vigorously. It was as if he had understood perfectly. Then he said, in a majestic and deep voice, "Insignificant humans, do you desire?" As soon as Mirakin opened his mouth, Jean had to hold his forehead for the first time in a long time. That was comment number 33, not number 3. Mirakin not 33, but 3. The third. Comment 33 was meant to be used when enemies clearly declared their surrender and swore allegiance. Naturally, it didn't fit the current situation at all. Swish! The hellfire was now at its peak, and the last flames were burning fiercely. The black tidal wave, the desperate screams of those who wanted to survive, and the destruction of humans, objects, and nature had reached its climax. Therefore, Mirakin's mistake was drowned out by the deafening noise. It's good that no one seems to have heard it. Saying irrelevant nonsense in such a solemn situation actually diminished one's dignity. Jean rubbed his chest. Mirakin seemed to realize that something was wrong and blinked, looking at Jean. Mirakin looked back at Jin's 3 raised fingers and, after a while, seemed to realize his mistake and opened his mouth again. From this moment on, Gaifa Islands are the land of Mirakin. Unlike the solemn and deep voice, this time it was dignified and full of strength. Everyone could hear Mirakin's voice clearly even in the terrible disorder. His land? Did the younger one kill Amila, the great mercenary? Vigo had no choice but to interpret the situation this way. If he limited himself to subduing Amila, he would have to show the injured Amila or at least her corpse. As expected, Amila was defeated by the 12th flag-bearer and Mirakin. Latz came to the same conclusion. He also thought that he would have killed Amila if he had been in Jin's place. If he kept Amila alive and she didn't show her willingness to be loyal like the Ghost Mercenaries or the Black Kings, then it would be inevitable for her to join another faction and become an enemy. No one can touch Amila recklessly after she belongs to another major faction. In Latz's opinion, now was the best time for Jean to kill Amila without burdens. Furthermore, it's the best time to kill all the witnesses. A terrifying future passed through Latz's mind in an instant. What if only the Knights of Runcandle, Jean, Mirakin, and Vigo survive on the Gaifa Islands, and everyone else dies? Therefore, what choice did Amila make, what kind of death did she find, and how did the 4 main factions that had been searching for her end up? Were questions that needed answers. Even if Runcandle published an article as he wished, the other factions had no means to refute it. Unless there were witnesses who witnessed the battles on the Gaifa Islands. Unlike other Runcandles, the 12th flag-bearer is particularly good at public opinion warfare. We have to prevent that from happening. In other words, he has to survive. He had to survive somehow and tell the Emperor what he had seen and experienced today. And since you have invaded my land, not a single person will survive. Mirakin finished his third comment. Latz clenched his teeth, and Jean let out a sigh of relief. I will kill everyone without exception. That was exactly what the third comment meant, but in reality Jean had no intention of killing them all. A few would have to return alive for the rumors to spread properly. However, individuals like Mitter Elner couldn't be spared. Excluding Runcandle, he would spare 5 people per faction, not key figures. That was the amount of mercy Jean wanted to grant. The black tidal wave was fading. The hellfire was coming to an end. Finally, the energy of the hellfire dissipated slowly, and what was seen on the ground was a devastated landscape of ashes and death. No screams or cries were heard. Jean couldn't even hear the painful sound of someone leaning on someone else. All that could be heard was the noise of burning corpses and the survivors gasping. In other words, There were no injured survivors. Those who couldn't withstand it were all dead. The sixth comment. When Jean gave a new signal, Murakin looked down. "Oh, I didn't know there were so many bugs that wouldn't die even if I stepped on them seriously. It's quite unpleasant." The sixth comment wasn't all words. As soon as the comment ended, Murakin released his black breath. The breath shot towards Kinsalo, and one of the top warriors of the White Wolf tribe was hit by it and died instantly. Murakin's strength reached 50%, and the resistance of the White Wolves was consumed like crazy trying to block the flames, so they couldn't respond. Of course, even considering those factors, there weren't many beings in the world who could defeat the best warrior of the White Wolf tribe so easily. Ah! The Tiger King, the lucky survivor of the Red Tiger tribe, panicked and took a step back. He was terrified once again when he saw only the remaining ankles of the dead top warrior of the White Wolf tribe on the ground. Now, not only the Red Tigers but even the White Wolf warriors had difficulty suppressing their fear. Gulp! Others who were watching involuntarily swallowed dry saliva repeatedly. The seventh comment. At Jin's signal, Murakin turned his head towards Vigo and Runcandle. And Runcandle, leave the island as soon as possible and return to the main family. And tell Rosa Runcandle. I will question her for daring to send family knights to my land without permission. She must have a proper explanation. Vigo's and the Guardian Knight's eyes widened. They could hardly believe what they were hearing. No, you just said that this land belongs to you from now on. And are you going to question my mother for sending us to your land without permission? We arrived first. What kind of nonsense is this? While Vigo thought, Murakin's words seemed to make no sense, and it was clear that he was shamelessly despising the acting patriarch. But Vigo couldn't argue with him. It was because he didn't know what would happen if he dared to fight in this situation. Moreover, opposing Murakin would only worsen the situation. Understood, Murakin-nim. I will deliver your message. But, may I ask you a question? Murakin discreetly lowered his eyes to look at Jean, and Jean nodded. Speak freely, Vigo Runcandle. What happened to the great mercenary Amila? Murakin lowered his eyes again, and Jean gestured to slit her throat. I killed her. Everyone had expected this outcome, but hearing Murakin say it directly left them with a hollow feeling. They had rushed to capture Amila, but they had only suffered significant losses. Even she was killed by a black dragon they didn't expect, and now the black dragon said he would kill them all. At least, no one died in Runcandle, and it wasn't bad because Vigo and his knights only fought in vain. You may find the ashes of that stupid mercenary if you look carefully on the coast around there. Thank you for letting me know, Murakin-nim. Now leave. Murakin-nim, can't you give us another chance? Murakin furrowed his brows at Vigo's words. What are you talking about suddenly? I have no problem if Murakin-nim massacres the imperial family and Kinsalo. However, soon, Zippel will receive reinforcements from the magic tower. It's because there's a master of the magic tower here. So we will help you. The staff of the master of the magic tower. Vigo was the flag-bearer of Runcandle, so he had read information about the staff of the master of the magic tower that had endangered Jean in Cologne in the past. The ability to call the main division in case of emergency. Jean shook his head and frowned as much as he could, and Murakin put on the most threatening expression he could. Vigo Runcandle, it seems you hold me in little regard. Are you going to help me? Only to deal with Zippel's main division. Murakin-nim, I have no other intentions. If you say one more word, I'll kill you too. Get out of here. I didn't call them. Suddenly, someone interrupted Murakin and shouted with a bright voice. It was Sandra Zippel. The eyes of everyone, including Murakin, focused on her. I didn't activate the master of the magic tower staff. So, Great Black Dragon, please stop being a puppet. And you, hidden puppet master, Jean Runcandle. How about finally introducing yourself? She was very eager to meet him at once. Sandra continued with a smile. Chapter 468. Murakin didn't forgive Sandra Zippel for her rudeness. He didn't need a special permission from Jean or carefully choose his words. He just had to make her pay the price for being unpleasant. Swoosh! The remnants of the shadow energy and blue flames near Sandra swayed at Mirakin's will. Silently, the remnants took the form of Lesnas. Then, like a descending hawk, they rushed towards Sandra. There were 8 of them. Most of Zippel's mages were on the verge of exhaustion from dealing with the flames, so they couldn't even react. Some mages, including Mitter, recognized Mirakin's attack but didn't act. It was because they didn't know what kind of trouble they might get into if they helped her. Surprisingly, Sandra dodged 3 of the 8 thrusts. She showed agile and light movements uncharacteristic of a mage, countering 3 with a protective shield. However, the remaining 2 were a problem. Kook! One pierced Sandra's shoulder, and the other went through her thigh. Even at a glance, it looked like a serious wound, with fresh flesh and blood splattering. Mirakin looked at Sandra, trembling as she fell. Mirakin seriously injured a pure-blooded Zippel without a second thought. It was only possible because he had such battle prowess to support his action, and it meant he could engage in a total war against all of Zippel. At least the members of the other main factions watching Mirakin couldn't help but think so. He said he would interrogate the acting patriarch, Rosa Runcandle, the Black Panther. Could it be that Mirakin is not just symbolic as a guardian deity, but also has real power over Runcandle? Power beyond the acting patriarch. Indeed, the acting patriarch of Runcandle might be the Black Dragon Mirakin. Then what will be the true rank of the 12th flag-bearer? Anyway, Sandra Zippel is finished. She's doing this even after seeing the best warrior of the White Wolf tribe die in an instant with only the remaining ankles. Has she become so insensitive to fear after living as a Zippel? The Special Force had such thoughts. The White Wolves of Kinselo and the Red Tigers had no thoughts. They just ran around in panic. Not only Sandra Zippel is finished. We won't survive without Zippel's reinforcements. Latz's eyes were shaking. Not a single person could survive. Latz was convinced that what Mirakin had just said was not a bluff. The current crew members here couldn't even inflict effective damage on Mirakin, let alone fight against him. Because of this, Latz made the decision that they had no choice but to surrender to Zippel in order to survive. Sandra didn't activate the Master of the Magic Tower staff and was gravely injured in a single blow. She will die soon. Latz felt the urge to scream. The Master of the Magic Tower is not Sandra but you, Mitter Elner. Activate the staff, Mitter. The reason I haven't killed you instantly is because I'm curious to know where that arrogance and heaviness come from. Puppet? Me? Say it again, Zippel. The cold and deep voice once again sent shivers down the members of the main factions. Ha ha! Sandra took a breath. It was natural to think that her breath had become faster due to the terror of death. But in reality, she was simply a bit surprised by the intensity of her pain. Clank, clank. Everyone heard the sound of gears turning out of nowhere. Came from Sandra. Those who watched her couldn't help but doubt their own eyes. It was because her pierced shoulder and thigh were healing rapidly. Hey, she's regenerating. A human. The White Wolves and Red Tigers had never seen a human perform regeneration at such a fast pace. On the other hand, Latz and his team watched with wide-open eyes, astonished. Has Zippel's living golem experiment progressed this much? It's at a level comparable to the Demon Man treatment received by the Imperial Guards. Living golem experiment. Zippel, Vermont, and Kinselo have been experimenting with living beings for a long time. Zippel wanted to create a perfect living golem, Vermont aimed to create a demon man, and Kinselo sought to make a golem using the characteristics of legends. Recently, Vermont had been confident that his experiments with living golems were clearly superior. There were still many unstable aspects in his experiments. Just like when Rick Helter, the leader of the Imperial Guards team in the past, lost his sanity after becoming a demon man. However, Sandra's high-speed regeneration is at a level similar to that of a demon man, and she retained her sanity. Latz thought that achieving this level of high-speed regeneration without using living golem surgery was impossible and superior to the Magen developed by the Empire. There may be someone within the Empire who leaked information to Zippel. It's very possible. While Latz gritted his teeth, Jean also observed Sandra's regeneration with a delayed heartbeat. Jean had just escaped from the core of the murky aura, erasing his presence as much as possible with his shadow energy. He thought it was necessary to check the outside situation in person. Has she healed? High-speed regeneration. Jean never imagined, not even in dreams, that he would see Sandra using high-speed regeneration. As Murakan mentioned while looking at Amala, high-speed regeneration is the specialty of inner core demonic creatures or demons. Amala had a special power of chaos and murky aura, which had been fully amplified so she could be like that. Is Sandra also born with chaos? If so, I don't think she would have suffered so helplessly in the murky fog. Contrary to what Jean thought, Sandra is an ordinary human not tainted by chaos. And others didn't even notice, but in Jin's opinion, Sandra's high-speed regeneration was something different from what he had experienced so far. Sandra's high-speed regeneration doesn't seem to heal the wound itself. It's as if the time of the wound is being reversed. Jean wasn't sure. The wound was healing too quickly, and she was too far away for him to see up close. Sandra Zippel. Jean had never interacted with her in his current life. However, in his past life, he had encountered her by pure chance. He had been waiting for Valeria at the campus fountain when he had a casual conversation about magic with Sandra. Matthew Morniak's 3-stage classification of magic? Wow, you're reading an interesting book. It's hard to come by. Who are you? I mistook Matthew Morniak for Matthew Werniak once, so I was scammed by a scammer. I guess you're the type of person who doesn't get easily fooled. Do you know me? I'm not so out of my mind to be fooled all the time, but sometimes I get fooled even when I know. Cute, isn't it? I didn't find out she was Sandra Zippel until a year later. Jean believed she was the typical mage lounging in the park, but he was taken aback to confirm her face in a newspaper article. Looking back, I wonder if she approached me with some intention. She must have wondered how miserably the exiled Runcandle lived and why. He was wandering around the mage area. That was the extent of Jin's interaction with Sandra. So, in his current life, he didn't pay too much attention to her. It was because she wasn't making a name for herself as a mage or contributing to her clan as a tower master, like the other children of Keliark. Just looking at the mages of Zippel who arrived at the Gaifa Islands right away, Mitter Elner is the master of the 7th magic tower, and he had the highest rank externally. In other words, he was a pure-blooded Zippel holding a rank equal to the 2nd-class flag-bearer of Runcandle. From Sandra's behavior and Mitter's look, Jean could deduce that Sandra had more influence in reality. Did she deliberately hide her power and abilities as Octavia Zippel? I thought Octavia wouldn't be the only one. But Sandra is really unexpected. The reason Jean thought so was that, through the marriage article, he learned that the woman who spoke to him at the fountain was Sandra. In Jin's past life, she had an arranged marriage with a lower-ranking member of the Vermont imperial family. It was a common practice that various powers, not just Zippel, used to their advantage. The surpluses of the 2nd generation were bound in political marriage and used as hostages or for some other purpose. If Sandra was a powerful person and hiding her power in my past life, she would have had to retire or live secluded like Octavia, but I can't think of any reason for a political marriage. The moment Jean thought to that point, Sandra opened her mouth. Ouch, this hurts a lot. I don't understand. Did my words bother you, Murakanim? What? I was afraid that the 12th flag-bearer and Murakanim would get into trouble, so I prevented the bastard from trying to activate the master's staff. I just wanted to meet Jean Runcandle and have a fight. I didn't know it would make you feel so bad, Sandra said sincerely. She thought there was no problem with the expression of a puppeteer or a puppet. To her, it's just a fact and not said sarcastically. If others heard this, what she told Mitter was also in a similar context. To be honest, even if you receive praise, it falls short. I know the Black Dragon is strong, but I think it's better to avoid troublesome things, right? She said. At that moment, even Murakan was momentarily silent. Sandra's calm way of speaking left no room for anything other than thoughts like, "What's going on here?" "Well, you're not wrong." Jean revealed himself and spoke. Continuing to force Murakan to deal with her would undermine his dignity. So, he decided it was better to deal with her himself. He needed to confirm the details of her regeneration. "Oh, Jean, run, Candle!" Sandra exclaimed with sparkling eyes. "Do you want to fight with me?" Their gazes met, and just as Sandra was about to nod, Jean closed the distance in an instant and stabbed her in the clavicle. "I think you're not worthy of that, Sandra Zippel." Before even pulling out the blade, he stabbed in her clavicle. Kong! The sound of gears turning scratched Jin's ears. Chapter 469. Kook! Sandra leaned forward and vomited blood. Bradamanti had pierced her clavicle completely, coming out the other side. A human should have died there. It was a mortal wound that couldn't be healed unless the healing power of the Holy Queen Lani or numerous blood drop was used. But Jean felt an invisible force pushing back the blade that had pierced Sandra's clavicle. It wasn't mana and certainly not aura. It's like authority/order. And it closely resembled the type of authority Jean was familiar with. An authority often displayed by the dragon of Ulta, the silver dragon Quicantle. The authority of time. As expected, I wasn't wrong from the beginning. But why is Sandra using the authority of time? It was impossible for Sandra to be the contractor of Ulta, because Enya has already been contracted for a long time. Zippel couldn't kill Enya and steal the contract as they did in Jin's past life. A god's authority can sometimes be used through various means, like receiving blessings from a deity, being granted the right to serve them, or through other methods, even if the person is not a formal contractor. However, in such cases, the authority can only be used at a low level. Jean swung again the sword that had been pushed back, intending to cut Sandra's throat. But Bradamanti couldn't reach Sandra's throat. It was because the space near Sandra was strangely distorted. When he swung his sword in the space, it only caused ripples as if cutting water, and it couldn't inflict damage. It's just like the day I met Quicantle Nim. At that time, she also countered my attack in this way. The authority to reverse time in an instant and ensure safety during the healing process was an authority that couldn't be considered low-level. Clang! Clunk! The sound of gears moving rapidly grew louder. The only difference between Quicantle and Sandra was that this noise occurred when using the authority. Murakin was also acknowledging Sandra's authority. He blinked as if he had received a considerable shock. Vigo and the Guardian Knights were barely suppressing their astonishment. I keep seeing variables that are not included in the mission information. Apparently, Sandra Zippel's ability seems to be part of the living golem experiment. But how could a pure-blooded Zippel become a test subject? And on top of that, she's Keliark's daughter. As Run Candle's sixth flag-bearer, Vigo knew about Zippel's experiments with living golems. As far as he knew, Zippel had never conducted an experiment with living golems using pure blood. They used zealots, civilians, or mages from lower families as test subjects. Does this mean that the results were stable enough to test using pure blood? Or is there some other reason? In any case, this alone is valuable information. He couldn't secure Amela, but he could write something meaningful in the report that would be sent to Rosa. Thanks to Sandra's special powers, Vigo slowly observed the reactions of Jean and Murakin. He thought that if he stayed a while on the island, he might report even more significant findings. Phew! I've hurt myself several times today. I don't like pain. I admit it. I'm a bit deficient when it comes to fighting. Sandra shrugged as she adjusted her clothes. That's quite an unpleasant ability, Sandra Zippel. You know, you look much handsomer in person than on the Golden Pung poster. Maybe I should consider dating you instead of fighting. Wouldn't it be a good time to activate the magical Tower Master's staff right now? Shall we have dinner? Or tea? Was it because she was so confident that she didn't even feel nervous about the situation? Or was it simply a matter of communication and conversational difficulties? Even when we briefly met in my past life, she only said what she thought. Took Jean a while to quickly understand Sandra Zippel. Ha ha ha. Do you know how I feel right now? I feel like a prince who has come to meet the princess after overcoming the obstacle of the Black Dragon. Sandra was literally babbling non-stop. There was no need for her to keep talking to someone with whom she couldn't engage in any conversation. I will subdue her and capture her alive if possible. Jean reached this conclusion. It was necessary to find out Sandra's ability. However, the reason he attached the premise of, if possible, was that capturing Sandra would once again reveal Zippel's living golem experiment to the world, and he could use that information against the other major factions. Zippel couldn't be so careless. So far, they've kept me in the dark since I was a provisional flag-bearer, but they can't let Sandra be captured alive. There was a high possibility that strong reinforcements were already nearby, or other means to prevent information leaks, so there was no need to use the magical Tower Master's staff. Just like Vermont's demon men rusted and disappeared when they reached their limits. No matter how bold she acts, she must be so sure because she has something to believe in, the ice-type sealing spell he learned from Valeria. Jean intended to use it to leave evidence of Sandra Zippel. It might seem difficult to go against the authority of time, but there was nothing wrong with trying. Bradamanti vibrated as he became enveloped in energy and shadow aura. Sandra also hastily raised her mana and created a protective shield. The threatening fire-type protective shield shimmered, but that was it. It was cut in half with a single slash, and as a result, it recoiled, and the attack magic formed in Sandra's hands did not harm Jean. On the other hand, Jean inflicted more than 3 severe wounds on Sandra even before 10 seconds had passed. Including the initial stab in the clavicle, it could be said that Sandra had already been killed by Jean 4 times. It's not that Sandra was weak. It's that Jean had become immensely strong. This was a fact that Vigo and the Guardian Knights, who witnessed the declaration of patriarchy, were already aware of. Excluding the Beastmen who were still in a state of shock, the members of Vermont and Zippel couldn't help but sigh inwardly as they watched the battle between the two. Murakan alone was already too much, but witnessing the combat prowess of the 12th flag-bearer left them in absolute darkness. And that wasn't all. Lord! 2 people emerged from the broken center of the murky aura. They were the Proc brothers who had just awakened from the curse. Just give the order. Faye and I will massacre them all. A black dragon flapping its majestic wings, and the Proc brothers from the Phantom Legion Mercenary Corps standing beneath it. And the difference in their class was evident. Crack. For some reason, Sandra was regenerating even faster with each wound. However, Sandra was unable to counterattack and only focused on recovering. Jean couldn't damage Sandra at all while her recovery reached maximum speed. Regardless of where he cut her, the wounds would heal before the blade left her body. It was a strange battle. For spectators who didn't know him well, it seemed like Jean was unilaterally harassing the weak. Jean continued to cut Sandra with an expressionless gaze. The concept of infinite strength did not exist in this world. Jean believed this and had often disproven those who claimed to possess infinite strength, like Amela, with her amplified murky aura. Haha, at this rate, I might actually fall in love with you. What? It was the first time Jean hesitated and stopped his sword at the unexpected comment. At that moment, even Jean couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine. It's possible for a human to become this insane without being tainted by chaos. Jean responded with a smile. Something terrible to say. Shall we get married? I heard you're going to marry the lady from the Hidden Palace. What about me? If you tell me the secret of your high-speed regeneration, I'll consider it. Really? It's not a very difficult condition. Do you know the demon god orb? With its help, we can imitate the authority of some gods. Boom! Suddenly, an explosion occurred between Jean and Sandra. Jean momentarily withdrew his body, and Sandra was unable to react, and in an instant, half of her head disappeared. It was a spatial explosion. It was the authority of Keliark Zippel used by Midir Elner. Jean turned his head, and his eyes filled with killing intent. Sandra Nim, what the hell are you talking about? Bastard, do you know what you're doing? Can't you see that I'm interacting with Jean Runcandle? You acted like you were well-mannered before. Midir was so dumbfounded that he was left speechless. He didn't know Sandra would speak about the demon god orb. Jean was equally amazed. Judging by Midir's reaction, the demon god orb is still a highly classified secret within Zippel. Of course, it has to be. They must be extremely cautious when revealing the name to the outside world. Sandra not only mentioned the name but went on to say, capable of imitating the authority of some gods. It was an unexpected harvest for Jean, but it left Mitter and the other Zippels completely stunned. Just interfere once more, and I'll kill you for real. Got it? I'll tear off your limbs, chew them into pieces, throw them, and trample on them. Answer me right now, you bastard. Sandra's voice had transformed from the cheerful nonsense she was spouting a moment ago to something malevolent and sinister. Even Murakin couldn't help but laugh at her poisonous energy. She's crazy. I can't even imagine how far Sandra will explode things if left alone. What to do? As Mitter made his decision, Bradamanti traced a sharp trajectory. Why would you do this to me, you bastard? Why don't you respond? Ugh! What Bradamanti cut off was Sandra's right hand. Distraction or lack of concentration. Sandra had briefly lost the maximum regeneration speed while cursing Mitter. There was no way Jean would overlook that opening. Unlike before, Sandra's wound didn't heal immediately. For the first time since the battle began, she suffered a wound. In a way, her amputated right arm fell to the ground. Click! Jean immediately formed an ice seal before her right arm touched the ground. Immediately, Jean could confirm that Sandra's affected area was healing. He could observe that Sandra's cut surface wasn't regenerating as if time was reversing like before, but healing like normal regeneration. Now that he had obtained the evidence he needed, there was no reason to continue hesitating. Murakin! Yes! Finish them off! At Jin's command, Murakin grinned sinisterly. Chapter 470. Whoa! The shadow energy released by Murakin began to color the sky as if black paint had dissolved in a transparent water jar. It was very fast. In an instant, it darkened as if it had turned into a moonless night, and Murakin's amber eyes stood out. Murakin's eyes blinked amid the darkness, resembling the eyes of a reaper, for those who observed him under the darkened sky. If I tell you to erase them all from that point on, you can freely use all comments after number 100. Comments after number 100? It seems like everyone is talking about death and destruction. That's right. You have to use those comments appropriately and really kill them all if possible. Just leave around 5 people who are not very important in each faction. Humph, Brat. It seems you're mistaken. That's something I can do well without separate instructions. Rather, it seems like your comments are used by trash trying to appear powerful. True experts like me instill fear more clearly. I know, but I said it because you need a bluff. What a bluff? You're not as strong as in your prime yet. Until you find all the strength, let's try to act with it as much as possible. You know your reputation is about to go down the drain after the Black King incident, right? Curse it. I don't like it. Anyway, I'll do as you say. How did you choose those ridiculous comments? Like, I am Murakin, the worst nightmare a mortal can suffer. You will be killed that you can never dream of? Was that 107? It's not bad. Is it? Anyway, when you kill enemies, use techniques that seem as important as possible. Inefficient but beautiful and majestic techniques. Okay. The conversation they had while making comments. Murakin said he didn't like it, but he actually felt a subtle satisfaction that his prestige had increased considerably after the Black King incident. Of course, compared to the majesty of his prime, he was now far from it, not even worth mentioning. However, he felt degraded when people who didn't know him treated him like an ordinary dragon, although there were very few occasions like that. In a way, now was the opportunity to elevate that level of satisfaction even more. I am Murakin. Vortices formed all over the black sky. Hundreds of vortices were created. In an instant, and a huge dark punch emerged from the center of all the vortices. They were black leeches spawning on the ground following Murakin's will. The worst nightmare a mortal can suffer. A solemn but chilling voice weighed on the entire island. It even resonated in all directions, riding on the shadow energy curtain, and the island's beasts and insects hurriedly hid from the ominous vibration. Birds flew off the island, and wild animals and insects burrowed deep into their dens. Once he had regained 50% of his strength, it seemed like all the movements of the insignificant creatures were being transmitted to him. The sound of a flock of birds frantically flapping their wings as they took flight, the sensation of small animals digging their burrows with front paws to seek refuge, and the scurrying and flying of insects delving deep into the forest. Murakin felt everything as he floated in the sky. He savored it. These were the senses he used to enjoy instead of music or magazines 1,000 years ago. He completely forgot about it until he regained 50% of his strength. Then Murakin waited silently for a while. He waited for the small creatures to have enough time to escape, and he also checked the positions of the small creatures that couldn't escape to make sure they wouldn't die when the massacre began. The movements of the insignificant creatures became so clear. Therefore, he couldn't help but feel the fear of the people beneath him. He created this kind of intimidation just by exerting his power. Imperial dragons were not afraid of anything. They say his heart was wounded, but is this really the power of a wounded dragon? Has he recovered? It's terrifying, terrifying. Save me. That's what the members of the Imperial family, Zippels, and the Beastmen of Kinselo thought. Their heartbeats and trembles seemed like a good melody to listen to. Yes, this is how it felt. The feeling that I can kill and forgive everything at will. Murakin's tail stiffened, and his chest trembled at the exciting sensation he had felt for the first time in 1,000 years. He wouldn't be able to savor this feeling against the world's top powers. But right now, he was like the god of the Gaifa Islands. All of Jin's enemies were extremely nervous, unable to open their mouths. Only one person, Sandra Zippel, kept cursing incessantly. Mitter Elner, ungrateful bastard. I warn you in advance, don't activate the Tower Master's staff without my permission. Huh? I'll cut your throat and place it in the middle of Draka Square. She seemed completely uninterested in her severed arm. Her amputation had healed a bit, and she had only stopped the bleeding with normal healing magic and not with the power of time. She not only kept pouring curses on Mitter, also, she spoke to Jean with an infinitely sweet voice. There's been a little problem with our date because of that bastard not worth feeding to the dogs. Will you generously understand it with a heart as good as your face? It would be better not to get involved with this human in any way. Such an instinctive signal resonated strongly in Jin's mind. Not only did a chill run down his spine, but he also experienced a strange kind of fear for the first time, to the point where Jin's entire body was covered in goosebumps. By the way, what were we talking about? The Demon God Orb. Ah, that's right, the Demon God Orb. The troubles we went through to get here without Kinselo. Sandra Nim. No, crazy. Could you lower your tone? Mitter's urgent shouts indicated that Sandra is about to reveal another secret, and Murakin noticed that the little creatures have either left or calmed down. You will become a dead person who can never dream again, Murakin finished comment 107. Then he scanned the ground with satisfied eyes. It was to mark the places where the leeches would fall. Sharp black leeches began to rain from the shadow energy vortices. Each vortex relentlessly spewed a giant punch and hundreds of smaller ones forming around it. From a distance, it looked as if a swarm of locusts were attacking the islands out of nowhere. What was even more terrifying was the fact that these punches fell without making any noise. Stop! Damn it, save Sandra Nim. Gah! Despite the deluge of leeches, all that could be heard were screams and the sound of destruction. Normally, a certain degree of collateral damage is expected even among allies when using magical spells or techniques of this magnitude. However, none of the shadow energy punches had fallen on the side where the Runcandle Knights were. They were falling while maintaining a distance of less than a palm's breadth from the Runcandles. It was as if an umbrella had been put up only on the Runcandle side. Naturally, the eyes of the Runcandles could only turn towards Jean and Murakin, especially towards Jean. In some ways, he seemed even more threatening than Murakin, who was busy raining leeches. Jean stood there with an indifferent expression, savoring the spectacle of his enemy's death. For the Runcandles, it was as if they had surreptitiously spied on the hierarchical relationship. Even if the younger one gives an order like that, does he act without a hint of discomfort? It is known that the relationship between a guardian dragon and its contractor usually places the former in a somewhat subordinate role. But isn't this a case of complete master and servant? More than stabbing and penetrating, Muraken's punch was literally crushing enemies. Even if I combine all the Guardian Knights and Application Knights under me, will I be able to keep up with one of Muraken's attacks? Vigo was convinced that he never could. My Guardian Knights can't even compare, and maybe not even my older brother's forces. They might not be able to handle Muraken. Vigo had a sudden thought. Of course, it wasn't the correct conclusion. Even if Muraken had regained 50% of his strength, Joshua had the Black Knights, the top Execution Knights of the clan, and elite Guardian Knights. If Muraken could single-handedly face all of them, Jean would become the Patriarch the next day. Vigo was wrong and genuinely intimidated by the overwhelming strength he hadn't seen in a long time. And that misunderstanding would become one of the great rumors circulating in the Garden of Swords after his return. Sandra was also being torn apart. What to do? Think marry me. Surprisingly, she kept regenerating her body just as she had been doing all along, and her gaze fixed on Jean. Kook! The elders who rushed to rescue Sandra let out a cry of agony as they opened a protective shield. They had to rescue Sandra because it was an order from Mitter, but in reality, the elders were powerless. Mitter knew it too. The pure blood is being torn apart in front of his eyes. But he only gave an order because he didn't know what troubles would come to him after his return if he took no action. He also needed to create justification. So many were sacrificed to save Sandra. But in the end, she was not in a condition to command the operation. Therefore, he had to take command in her place. Seventh Tower Master, this is enough. Even if you command now, the Patriarch and the elders will understand. We will be annihilated at this rate. Sandranim's regeneration is not infinite. We have to use that method to save her, an elder said, looking at the punch that had pierced the protective shield. Mitter could do nothing but nod as if he had no other choice, biting his lips forcefully. Considering that the colossal form has disappeared, it is highly likely that the great mercenary Amila has already been defeated by Muraken. Seventh Tower Master, I know you want to avenge the former Seventh Tower Master, but you must step back now. Seventh Tower Master, stand firm. That method was the real reason why Mitter refused to surrender even after seeing Muraken and Jin's accidentally collaborated flames from the beginning. Hada! Mitter took a breath. He was trying to control his breath, stirred by the excitement of finally being able to revenge. It might be better this way. If Sandra had simply asked him to retreat, Mitter would have had to leave with no chance of revenge, leaving his nemesis right in front of his eyes. Good, Mitter said as he took something out of his pocket.